Hi, this is Farhan Siddiqui and you're watching The H-Town Show. Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, The H-Town Show with Farhan Siddiqui. We all know that we are heading towards the election 2020, which is happening really in November 2020. We are trying to introduce all the candidates who are really important to the community, especially Indo and Pakistani community. They want to do something. And luckily, I have an honor to invite in my show a very dashing personality, a very educated person, very decent, very sober, and of course, she deserved winning, by the way. Sandra Moore. She is running for Texas State House District 133. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Sandra, tell us something about your experience, your education, to my viewers.
So, thank you for this opportunity to speak. And I am a licensed professional counselor. I've been in practice in Texas since 1985. I have lived in District 133 since 1987. So I know this district very well. In my practice, I worked with children for 20 years under the age of 12, and I have continued to see adolescents in adults ever since. I've written 2 books, one being the Adult ADD Handbook, What You and Your Family Need to Know, and the other book is basically on women and includes a very long chapter on dealing with sexual abuse, because I'm also an expert in sexual abuse. So that's a little bit about my background. I will say, however, that I have an adult son who went to school through Spring Branch ISD, public education. The education he got 20 years ago is quite different from the education that's available today, I'm sorry to say. And that is part of why I'm running.
Sandra, you just mentioned that you are living in District 133 since 1987.
Right.
So, what personally I think that you are the best candidate who knows all the problems, the basic issues from the grassroots level. What kind of problems a resident in District 133 has. What are the common issues you always hear when you go block walking, when you meet with the people in the neighborhoods? And by the way, before you answer, I would like you to basically tell us what District 133 covers. How big, what is the area of 133?
Great question. So 133 extends basically from the west side of 610 all the way to Highway 6. And then, so that's the width. And then the length is from the south side of I-10 to the north side of Westheimer. So in fact, this is State District 133. And so there are about 170,000 residents,
Wow.
largely educated, but it's a somewhat bifurcated district. You will have people who are very, very wealthy, but you will also have people who are struggling, especially during this time of COVID, where they're worried about being evicted from their apartments because they lost their jobs. I knocked on, prior to the COVID crisis, I was not challenged in the primary race for the Democrats, but I ran as if there was a challenger, so I personally knocked on 1,600 doors. And then a good friend of mine whom I met while door knocking knocked on over 2,000 doors. And we found 4 common themes. Do you want to hear them?
Sure, please go ahead.
Okay. So 133 was profoundly impacted along Buffalo Bayou by Hurricane Harvey. I live adjacent to Buffalo Bayou, and I walked through those floodwaters, and I saw the bayou raging. It looked like a river in the Amazon during the rainy season, except there are no people on either side of it. Those waters extended almost a half mile on either side of the bayou. Even though I live adjacent to the bayou, I am not considered as living in a floodplain area. In my modest townhome, there are 80 townhomes. 15 of us did not flood. And almost no one had flood insurance. It's ironic, I had flood insurance, the max, and I was one of the few who didn't flood. Consequently, my neighbors, FEMA gave families about $17,000 to repair their homes. But if you have a home that's valued at $150,000, if you can find a home for $150,000, and you have $100,000 worth of damage, and they give you $17,000, that's wonderful that they gave you $17,000, but the other $83,000 have to come out of your pocket. I know people who no longer are able to retire. I know people who just sold at rock bottom. I know people who are repairing their homes in stages. I also know that we have not progressed with the speed with which we need to move forward to repair the problems of Buffalo Bayou, which of all the bayous in Harris County is the most overbuilt. And so our remedies are extremely difficult. They've talked about a third dam, but the United States Army Corps of Engineers has yet to release the results. It should be coming within the next month to say whether that dam is viable. But I think today might be the 3rd anniversary of Harvey.
Correct.
August 29th.
Correct.
Over the last year especially, people in the know are looking at natural cures. And what would that constitute? Well, that would constitute buying about 20 to 30,000 acres of the Katy Prairie and leaving that land as fallow. It has natural prairie grasses which absorb water beautifully. I am a supporter of buying out homes. Now, FEMA's requirements for a home buyout is that you must have flooded 3 times. Okay, the bayou hadn't flooded before. So if people have to wait 3 times for a buyout, well, the way things are going, that could be 3 or 4 years. However, I don't think the residents of 133 should have to suffer. I think we need to, the State House, specifically the Natural Resources Committee, which I would like to be on, needs to interface with the county Commissioners Court, and the federal government, specifically Lizzie Fletcher and Dan Crenshaw, to take a look at buyouts along 133. And why did I mention Dan Crenshaw? Because parts of 133 congressionally are in 07, which is Lizzie Fletcher's area, and a small part is 02, which is Dan Crenshaw's area. And so there needs to be an intensive interface to create a plan for buyouts so that we can create reasonable detention areas that will protect enough homes that make the cost worth it. So if you're going to spend $250 million on a project that's going to protect fewer than 1,000 homes, I don't think that's a good expense. There was one proposal involving Terry Hershey Park for that. I think what we need to look at is areas along Buffalo Bayou where we do buyouts. And so let's say a place like mine might be ripe for a buyout. Okay, I'm not going to be really happy. On the other hand, having lived through this and walked through those waters, I know that this is necessary. There are a lot of other things that can be done, but we still have to basically wait for the Army Corps of Engineers report.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Since we have, as you mentioned today, we have a 3rd anniversary of Harvey, a big disaster. Do you think, based on your experience, whatever is happening right now, like in the course of these three years, do you think that, God forbid, if something goes wrong, something Harvey-like thing happens again, do you think we are ready enough to face or handle resources-wise, budget-wise?
Not at all.
Okay.
We are not ready. So here's the tragedy. The Gulf waters are warming. I don't care if you believe in climate change. The fact is that the waters of the Gulf of Mexico are warming. And if you take a look at the last couple of hurricanes, they've really intensified as they neared land. Why? Because the sun could reach the bottom and reflect and increase the heat. And so hurricanes thrive on heat. It just feeds, propels that wind. I could say a wind tunnel. So that when Laura came ashore, she was a Cat 4, almost a Cat 5, and that happened within hours. Now, because the waters are warming, we can expect more hurricanes and more intense hurricanes. Now the problem is if it's a wind event, well then everybody in Houston is going to be impacted equally. There won't be much left standing. Like my house would have been flattened because I live in a wood house, townhome. But if it's a rain event, the way Harvey was, because there are different types of hurricanes, if it's a rain event, it will happen again. Now, the help that can be given to Addicks and Barker dams is limited. You can't dig far down. You've got the water table. Okay, we're almost at sea level. The amount that you can build up, candidly, is limited. But it isn't known yet if a 3rd dam is viable, and the suggestion is that it isn't, which makes the use of natural resources that much more critical.
So is that true, like, God forbid, if Laura hits the Houston?
Right.
Were we ready? Or we could see like a big disaster where we could, there is a loss of lives, loss of assets, the properties and everything. Were we prepared enough to face the Laura?
I don't know that we can. Look, in Harris County, there are 4 million people. I don't know if any of you were here during Rita, the hurricane that didn't happen. And so much of the city evacuated. I did not. It was just a disaster. People were in their cars they were running out of gas after having gone 4 miles. On the other hand, the idea with the Laura barreling upon Houston of shelter in place is very, very risky. So they talked about evacuations at timed intervals. So if you live in this quadrant, you evacuate at this time. If you live here, you evacuate, to try to space it out. The question, the problem is that requires complete and total buy-in from the population. Yeah, I'm going to wait. Yeah, how's that working out? I mean, there are people who won't do a buy-in for a face mask. How difficult is a face mask? So I think what we have to do is expedite how we're dealing with the bayous. I really believe that the county and the city are doing everything they can. Mm-hmm. I know that Lizzie Fletcher got money for the county and the city to rebuild, to engage in projects. We voted on the bond project, which I certainly voted for. The state has not been exceptionally proactive by and large, other than there's really an excellent person in the State House, a Republican. Yes, I did say that, ladies and gentlemen. I know I'm running as a Democrat, but my job is to represent every person in 133, and not just the people who like me, and not just the people that I like. So this man from Orange, Texas, Dade Phelan, put together the flood plan in the state. And the Senate used it for their blueprint. And so there's a flood fund, but it's only a couple $2 billion. That is not a lot of money in terms of government oversight and assistance. Underutilized, I mentioned this earlier, committee is the State Natural Resources Committee. And so this is the committee that's ideal to be interfacing with Katy Prairie Conservancy, the Sierra Club, county, federal, city departments that are tasked with coming up with solutions. Now, the solutions currently on the table looking for completion, and this is from the Army Corps of Engineers, say that we're looking at 10 years. And I talked to some flood experts about that, and of course they know that, but they all say that is way too long. The problem is we have to do research. You can't just leap in and throw something out there. And these research projects can take 2 or 3 years. So while you and I might feel a sense of urgency, when you're dealing with tens of billions of dollars, we may end up experiencing another couple of hurricanes before we achieve these solutions. And each disaster seems to shake people loose of the notion that it costs too much money.
So, Sandra, I want basically my audience know what are the powers of the Texas State House District 133. If you win, we wish you win. What are your powers? And before that, what the residents of 133 will get a benefit if they select you. I want you to please explain to the audience so they can understand exactly what.
Okay, so the state legislature meets every 2 years, all right? So they're going to meet in January of 2021. And they meet for 140 days every 2 years. Now, Canada has something like 33 million people. Texas has 29 million. Oh. Canada's government meets all year round. Ours meets every 2 years for 140 days. By the way, state legislators and state senators get paid a grand total of $600 a month. Now, even though they only meet for 140 days every 2 years, they are assigned to committees, And those committees meet throughout and make recommendations to the Speaker of the House, the Lieutenant Governor, and the Governor. And that goes on all year long. So just so you know that. So anybody who's running is not running to make any money. At least this old girl ain't. The power of the state legislature, when they meet every 2 years, is to develop a budget. And the bills that are developed will utilize those budgets. So there are they're called articles. The legislature has to deal with 10 articles. So there are several articles that the legislature deals with that is powerfully important. Article 2 is health care. That's about $40 billion every 2 years. Article 3 is education. That's about $50 billion. Now that sounds like a lot of money until you realize we have the most uninsured people, this state, that has the best medical center in the world. That is not debated, but we have the most uninsured people in the country. And then in terms of education, we rank 43rd out of 50 states. And you might say, well, why? Well, we do not have a state income tax. And an amendment was just passed in the November municipal elections that because that amendment was passed, it'll be at least 20 years before people could vote in a state income tax. Now, that savings has a cost, and that cost is health care and education. And so we are always scrambling. And this state has relied on fossil fuel, the revenues from the taxes for fossil fuels, that, guess what? People are shifting gears. Even large oil companies are developing wind energy because the oil industry and even the gas industry is contracting. Now, 10 years ago, when all these reserves of gas were discovered, I mean, it was a fracking boom. And by the way, I'm not totally against fracking. I was really happy to see us become more autonomous. But now we have a glut of gas and a surplus of oil. Once we were very dependent on other countries, and now the oil companies are continually contracting. And as they release, the numbers of people they release at any given point in time, when the economy rebounds, the number of people they bring back is far less than the number of people they downsize. So we have to think about where are we going to get money? And there are ways that this could be done through the Equal and Uniform Appraisal Act. I'm not an expert on this. Some of you will know what I'm talking about here, where all buildings are assessed, like a newer building is not assessed at the same value as an older building, and currently that's what's happening. The other way, and this would affect me directly as a small business owner, is to increase the franchise tax. I render a service, therefore I have to pay a franchise tax. Right now it's totally negligible, but I wouldn't mind if it went up 300%, if it would mean that the citizens of Texas, not just 133, would be receiving health care and a good education. So in addition, the legislature deals with criminal justice. So you have money for the prisons. then, and by the way, you may not know this, but it is legal to keep a temperature in a state jail at 88 degrees. That is not considered cruel and unusual punishment. So I ask you, sit in a 6 by 8 or a 10 by 8 room and leave it at 88 degrees and sit there for 20 out of 24 hours a day and see how you feel. In my book, that's cruel and unusual punishment. But it does save money on energy costs. So the state has to deal with the prisons, and then they also have to deal with things like probation, parole, and all those costs, which are enormous. So there are two divisions, two articles that relate to criminal justice, and the amount of money they get is so little it'll make you weep. But that's why I've explained the difficulty of coming up with money, because things that are so obvious that, oh yeah, we need to do that. There are lots of bills I want to put out there. The challenge is, how are we going to pay for it? Then I have a couple ideas, franchise tax being one of them.
So,
oh, excuse me, did that answer the question?
Yes, I mean, so basically what all we want to know is, if you win, so we want to know what powers you will have and you will apply to basically benefit of the people of District 133 and then moving forward, like Texas as a whole. How do you see the, again, my question again in the same context where if you win, how do we see the school districts in District 133, the employment, the businesses, the religious kind of like a safety on a religious worship places? How would you explain about this one?
Okay, so that was a lot right there. First of all, I believe in religious safety. My concern is if I want to deny you service because of my sincerely held religious belief. In fact, the guy from Orange, Texas I told you about is the one who didn't let that bill get out of committee onto the floor of the State House for a vote. He is to be commended. But I had written a long monologue because I was prepared to go to Austin to speak against that bill. I thought it was reprehensible. As a licensed professional counselor, I am not supposed to let my religious beliefs, nor should a physician let his or her religious beliefs come between me rendering you service. Okay? Last I checked, this was still a democracy. And you are entitled to get service from the very best people possible. So I would strenuously work to do whatever I could to see that such a bill was not put out there to be voted on in the House. Now, if the Democrats get the House, then that bill will never come onto the floor. If the Democrats don't get the House, it depends on who's head of the Ways and Means Committee. In this case, State Affairs Committee. In this case, it was Dade Phelan, and he didn't let it out of committee. So that's one thing about which I feel strongly. Let's talk about education, and let's go back to all those doors that got knocked on in the primary. There were 3 issues. Business wasn't a big one, but because I have a business, that's an issue for me. One thing that people in 133 want are special needs evaluations for the students. So here's what happened. There are 225,000 students in Texas entitled to a special ed education evaluation and consequent services. That's the law. Now, nationally, about almost 14% of students qualify under special ed. That could be ADD, that could be kids on the spectrum, that could be hearing, that could be visual, that could be cerebral palsy. All of these children are entitled. But the governor capped, and I don't know if it was this governor or the preceding governor, capped special ed eval at 8.5% in Texas. So I would say to families, hey, I think this kid has ADD. Let's put the kid in the class, in their worst class, and have them observed. Yeah, great idea. So they would go. And the observer, and I would say, whatever you do, don't observe the kid in their favorite subject where they're doing well. Observe them in their worst subject where they're doing poorly. This is where you will see the identifying behaviors. So what do you think they did?
They were not focused on that.
They observed them in the best class and said, hey, there's no problem. So if the parents had enough money, and insurance, they would go get an evaluation. And even if they took it to the schools often didn't do anything. Now, it isn't because the schools are evil. I know a ton of teachers and I know principals. It's because a special ed kid can cost $25,000 to $30,000 a year. And the state allocates $12,000 a kid in public school. And I think it's $9,000 in charter. And so that's why it's kind of like, those cups and, where's the ball under the cup? Because that's why these kids haven't been evaluated. So a federal judge said, hey, this violates the law. These kids need their evaluations. So Texas Education Agency had to made up a committee of people who like charter schools. I like public schools. But there are a few excellent people on that committee. And they were talking about pouring in $500 million. Okay. But I want to put a bill out that says this cannot go to a corporation. Because what happens is, like with a lot of HMOs, health maintenance organizations, what happens with a lot of HMOs is this thing called capitation, where you render the service, but the amount that's left over is yours. So of course there's an incentive to render as little service as possible. And they do it for rock bottom prices, and you get rock bottom evaluations. So they're going to have to go out of the school system. There aren't enough diagnosticians. What I want to see, you asked what's the power? I want to put a bill out there that says this isn't going to go to a corporation and that they have to be licensed in Texas and that they will be mom and pop operations.
So one question I asked, sorry to interrupt you. So will you be discouraging the charter schools and the private schools?
Well, private schools, people pay, okay? They're paying $20,000 to $40,000 a year, okay? They're getting nothing from the state. I'm leaving them alone. The charter schools are another matter. They are not held anywhere near to the standard. In fact, those are some bills I want to put out there. That they be held to the same standard for testing. And by the way, in case you're wondering, these state tests, like the Texas Assessment of Knowledge Skills, are ridiculous. And they have removed critical thinking. Now, I know people in the Indian Pakistani community, and education is prized, and critical thinking is valued. And these state tests, I know why they were done. It was to make sure that everybody was learning. But it's, the law of unintended consequences. What happened was teachers began teaching to the test. And then it got to a point where teachers had to end on the same page every day, so that you couldn't have a creative conversation. You couldn't foster creative thinking. You couldn't, in algebra, I think that works. But if you're in English and history, government, you want to foster thought. What would have been another way to do this? What could have been? And all of that critical thinking got thrown out. So I would like to see those tests go away. And then let's see how it all shakes out. Because it isn't working. Even with it, we still have all kinds of underperforming schools. So we might as well get rid of it and go back to the curriculum-based instead of the test-based and test that we used to take in school. The other thing I'd like to see is more handwritten tests. Okay, they'll do it on the computer. So that they can think through. I don't know about you, but I don't do well in multiple choice. I don't do well in multiple choice because I'm somewhat intelligent, and I always narrow it down to two, and then because I'm a critical thinker at times, it's like, well, could be this, could be that. So I would like to see that knocked out. If the Democrats take the House, I'm pretty confident a bill will be put out to remove it. Now, charters need to be held as accountable for these tests. The other thing is, if a kid is acting out at a charter school, they expel them. So they have to meet special needs as well. For those who have higher standards, it's because they get to cherry pick the kids.
Right.
But, by that, when I was a child, they would have expelled me. Because I was pretty hyper and always on a roll, talked out of turn, came out with ideas like, oh my God, where did that come from? They would have ditched me in a New York second. So I don't support charter schools. In fact, I intend to propose, because of COVID and less money, bless you. I intend to propose that the amount of money the state gives to charters be decreased to maybe $5,000 per student. Right now, I believe it's $9,000. And that money goes directly to special ed and public education.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a time for break. We are having a very interesting conversation with Sandra Moore, running for Texas State House District 133. Don't go anywhere. Watch Desi TV USA, The H-Town Show with Farhan Siddiqui. Hi, this is Farhan Siddiqui, and you're watching The H-Town Show. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for watching my show, The H-Town Show with Farhan Siddiqui. We are having a very good show, very good conversation with Ms. Sandra Moore. She is running for Texas State House District 133. I want to talk to you about the business progression. How do you see the business compilation in your District 133? What are the plans where all the businesses, they are struggling because of the COVID-19? Any plans do you have?
Well, there are a lot of business owners in 133. So there are a lot of larger companies that in fact did get the payroll plan. They got that funding.
All right. PPP.
Right. And sadly, COVID has continued. And so a lot of these companies are actually going to need another round. Now that's federal, that's not state, but I want to be very clear that I support this. Because for every company that goes under, that's people unemployed who will not get that job back.
Correct.
So sometimes you've probably heard this, to make money you have to spend money. And so even though this could add $2 trillion to the deficit, it's an expense that's worth it because of what will happen if we don't. There will be more people in 133 without jobs. So I think it's not neat and tidy, but it is necessary. Now, for people like me, I'm a one-person business, a sole owner, an S corp. And so there are some things that could be done to help sole owners. And one would be to allow sole owners to buy insurance on the business marketplace. Right now, someone like me cannot buy insurance on the business marketplace for insurance.
Right.
There has to be two or more. But so much of America is built on, I can do this. And there are so many, not mom and pops, just pops or mom, businesses that are getting no mercy whatsoever. A number of banks would only deal with larger companies, so let's say 400 employees versus one. And I think the PPP this time needs to include these smaller businesses, because if we were to go away, so would our taxes. So I said I only pay a little franchise tax right now. Okay, but I pay it. If we go out of business, then that's no franchise tax. In fact, I'm going to go get unemployment insurance. So now I'm taking from the state instead of putting into the state. So I think we definitely need the PPP. And I'm smiling because I told Mr. Siddiqui, no, I don't want to talk about the federal government. And here I am talking about the federal government. But this is how it affects small business in 133. The other thing that I would like to see is, in terms of individuals, that there be preferred provider organization healthcare plans available to us who don't work for large companies, and not just health maintenance organizations. Health maintenance organizations pay the provider less, to the point where a lot of providers like, I can't afford this. Like, I dropped off all HMOs years ago because it's like, sorry folks, I cannot work for almost free after I pay my bills. So right now, the state needs to open, they need to accept Medicaid, and they need to do a state exchange for health care. That would be so helpful. It would also take pressure off of small business owners, because then people who work in small businesses could use the state exchange to get a PPO, which does pay a little bit more to the provider, so that they could get service faster. So those are some things that I have seriously thought about.
Let's talk about your objectives, your missions. What do you want to talk about? Like, what are your core objectives?
Okay, well, I already talked about evaluations for kids in school. We've already talked about, Buffalo Bayou. That's where my expertise is, that I'm developing, courtesy of, doesn't take but walking through floodwaters to get you real interested in what can we do to fix this. then I've talked about healthcare, but I want to come back to healthcare because I do healthcare, mental health, but it involves a lot of physical. So one of the things that I want to put out is a bill to, if we can do nothing else, to have pregnant women covered by Medicaid for 18 months and not 2 months. And the reason I say this is because blood pressure issues and postpartum depression don't necessarily show up immediately. What happens with a lot of women is they're doing okay, and then all of a sudden, I've had women who came in and were suicidal and didn't know that they had postpartum. They just felt worthless. They felt like they weren't bonding with their children, and their OB-GYNs didn't diagnose it. Nobody diagnosed it except your friendly neighborhood therapist here. So if you have no insurance, what happens? Well, I'll tell you what happens. A lot of women drink. A lot of women use drugs. Not all, okay? I'm not sweeping a broad brush. But there are women who aren't alive because they killed themselves because they felt so terrible that they weren't bonding with their children because they didn't have insurance and they didn't know they had postpartum and they didn't know that it could be treated with medication. There is tremendous success treating postpartum depression with medication. So not only do we need to leave women on it long enough to identify it, they need to be on it long enough to recover. So I think a minimum of 18 months. I personally would like 24 months, but I don't know if we could get that through. The state is also looking, this just came out, it's hot off the press. They're recommending a cut in health care provided to women through the Texas Women's Coalition Health Program. They're recommending a cut of $15 million.
Wow.
Remember I said that the health care budget is $40 billion? So they want to cut this program that deals exactly with the type of thing I've just been talking about. They want to curtail it, but they're adding money to their alternative abortion program. Well, if you don't like abortion, that's fine. It's that this is not done scientifically. And so you're going to add money here as opposed to add money here that helps women address family planning, bless you, so that there isn't the need to consider an abortion because there isn't an unwanted pregnancy. But for some reason, the lieutenant governor, the speaker of the House, and the governor don't want to deal with family planning. There is nothing the matter with planning for how many kids you're going to have. Recently, someone said, well, we might have another one. And I said, without any sarcasm, well, you can afford it. And they said, yes, I can. Well, we can. And I wasn't being critical, and they weren't being critical. But there are a lot of people who can't afford, this many kids. And this is where family planning negates the need to even think about terminating a pregnancy. So that's another thing that I want to go to the legislature and fight for and put the alternative in. The last thing, which might surprise you, but bear with me, is the legalization of marijuana. I want to outright legalize it up to 2 ounces. Now, that means you certainly don't smoke it, but you probably know people who do, even if you don't know that you know people who do. That would give them a little bit, by the way, I don't use, that would give them, I got enough to get me through a couple weeks or a month. And then I want to decriminalize possession 2.1 to 4 ounces. So I shared this with someone, and it was a he, and he said, well, I'm going to support this. He was a Republican. And I looked at him, and he said, well, I don't smoke it, but my kids do, and I'm worried to death about them. Now, he wasn't worried they were going to die. He was worried they were going to be charged with a misdemeanor or, God forbid, a felony, possession with intent to traffic. And it depends on who you will know this, it depends on who the officer is, whether he charges you, okay, if he thinks he can get away with a felony. Now, the district attorney's office isn't going to buy into it, but he could certainly scare, or she could certainly scare the family. And so I want to remove all that. Now, as a licensed professional counselor, one thing I didn't mention is I was also at one point a licensed chemical dependency counselor, but I don't need that license because I already have expertise, so I can treat people as an LPC. I've had people die from alcohol. I've had people die from nicotine. I've had people die from cocaine, all right? These are all central nervous system depressants. You get depressed enough, you kill yourself. Or your body just collapses. It just cannot function. I have never had anybody die from marijuana. I've not had anybody lose their job on account of marijuana. But I have seen people who were arrested for possession of marijuana.
I have a question here,
Yeah.
Sandra. This is a question, like a very common question must have arisen from my community, especially the audience who are watching us. Why are we just weighing more to the marijuana, the legalization of the marijuana? Why not like at women empowerment? This is just a question from my community perspective. The women empowerment, some programs for the women, some kind of mental diseases, senior citizens issues in my community actually. So are we planning to basically create any kind of multi-service centers for the citizens where they can go, they can spare some time, they can entertain themselves, they can make some good friends, new friends, they can spend some time? Because here in US, the life is so fast, everybody is busy. And the parents are sitting idle, doing nothing at home, they are alone. Kids are working, their daughter-in-laws are working, they are feeling loneliness. Do you have any plan, or can you add some kind of an agenda as a point? Once you win, are you planning to create some kind of multi-centers for these citizens or the people who are feeling low?
So there are already multi-service centers, and these are county centers. So there's like West Gray, there's one over off the Loop, but this is county, and less state and less federal. So my suggestion would be, one thing I don't underestimate is the power of the religious community in the Indian Pakistani communities. And so my suggestion would be, and I have seen what you're talking about, where grandma stays home by herself in isolation. And in fact, when I would door knock, sometimes grandma would come to the door and, oh my God, somebody to talk to. So I agree with you. Socialization, especially for the elderly who are isolated, is critical. I think this is largely interfacing between setting up maybe adjuncts to like West Gray and West Loop Community Center, public health centers, and like Trini Mendenhall and Tracy G, that these would be adjuncts where the community works with the county to create times where, okay, we're going to add this for these people. And then the religious leaders get out there and promote it like, hey, folks, there's a place for Grandma to go. And then, of course, well, how's Grandma going to get? Now, this is post-COVID. How's Grandma going to get there? Then this is where both communities work together to take a look at how to get Grandma there. I think that's something that, as an individual, I can support, but off the top, I'm not thinking about, I can't think of something where legislatively there's a lot that I can do about that, other than to say, okay, you come to me, I'm elected, and you come to me and say, you know what, we want to do this. And I say, gee, that sounds good. We can take this out of a grant. You need a grant for this? Let's see if we can't get Health and Human Services to cough up some money so that you have a grant. So that means the communities, okay, Commissioners Court and the religious community come together, decide what they want, and then find some of us who are willing to say, hey, let's create a grant for this organization. In terms of statewide, that would have to be a grassroots, I think. But I know Houston, you could do this community.
So in District 133, I'm very glad and I have a very good trust on you that, do you have any plan to give more room for the minority communities, especially like the Muslim community, where they want to build some more mosques in different districts? Because right now Houston is very diversified community,
Yes.
right? For example, Sugar Land, the whole Fort Bend County itself is really diversified. And so District 133, will you be encouraging or will you be more attractive towards where if we bring any kind of a proposal to build a mosque, so will you be supporting that cause?
Well, I don't see why I wouldn't. And this is where, for those who are narrow-minded, I would be saying, you know, look, it can't just be your religious values sincerely held. We got plenty of churches. Right. There are a few temples, Jewish temples. Right. There are Catholic churches. You know, we've got every religion represented. So what would be the problem with a mosque? Now, at that point, I would be perfectly prepared to say, if you are against a mosque, I see you as anti-Muslim. That's how I would evaluate you. And make sure that you know I intend to share that information. I won't keep that. The best way to fight racism is anti-racism.
Correct.
And you know, there are a couple terrible racists in this city who fight every single thing, including the mask order. And I do know that a lot of racists, when you confront the racism, get outraged and yell and scream even louder. And that's my goal, for them to look as out of step with 133 as they are.
In the end, I'd like to request you, do you mind just share how, being a voter, when I'm going to any polling station, what kind of environment should I expect, how should I vote? Do you mind just tell like how the ballot paper would look like? Or
Yes. I just want, for 1 second now, I want to come back to marijuana. Sure. It gets legalized. So the next step, just like we don't want corporations testing children because they're going to shortchange the kids yet again, you might as well not bother. Save the money, folks. So I would want the ownership to be mom and pop ownerships. So, and that there be a limit on the number you can own. so that you don't become a large corporation. And the tax money, I want it to go to criminal justice. I would like to see it go to improving conditions in the prisons. So that, okay, I don't know how you feel about 80 degrees. Some days I can handle it, other days I cannot. But I would like to see the prisons be no lower than 80 degrees. So I want to come back to that. Now, this critical question of the ballot. Mr. Siddiqui and I were talking before we began. And so it used to be when you went and voted 2 years ago, you could decide, I'm voting all Republican, and just push the button for all Republican, and you're good to go. You leave. That took 2 seconds. You don't know who you voted for, but you know you voted Republican. Or you could vote straight Democratic ticket. You don't know who you voted for, but you know you voted straight Democrat. So, candidly, the state got very, very anxious and decided we're going to remove straight ticket voting. Okay, you can no longer go in and push one button. So in this current coming up election, and by the way, early voting starts October 13th, they will have, there will be at least one day a 24-hour voting center. You are also now legally allowed to vote wherever you choose to. So if you don't have time to run over to the polling station listed on your card, it no longer matters. Your voting privilege is not revoked. Okay, so it's important to understand that. And then there must be 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, before Election Day, where you can't vote, and I guess it's to count all the ballots. There's some sort of reason, but I can't tell you what it is. So now you're in the voting booth, and by the way, if you didn't vote in the primary, and you decide to go in person, I always vote in person. You might be able to, I know it comes as a surprise, but I'm a little bit older. And so I still decided I got to go vote on voting day. I am not mailing in my ballot. Well, then bring your ballot with you if you automatically get a ballot in the mail, and that will be everybody 65 and over. But you have to show them you didn't already send in your ballot so that you can't be accused of double voting. So then they'll ask to see your driver's license, and what the address on your driver's license, that's who you will get in the list. So let's say you lived in another district, you moved to 133, but you didn't change your voting address. So they're going to give you a ballot for your old district. So you won't be able to vote for me, and I'm going to cry. But now you've passed those hurdles, they will give you a little finger glove. You put it on your finger. It's a little blue glove. It just goes on your finger. So you can press the buttons safely. It's cute and it's easy. And then you now go through every race that's on the ballot. So first you go through the federal races. So that will be the president, the senator. There's going to be one Senate race, not two. And congressional, there'll be one race that's consistent with where you live. Okay, so in my district, there'll be one congressional race. I've already said Lizzie Fletcher. So that would be, the challenger. Right, I know who the challenger is. So you would pick Democrat or Republican, Republican or Democrat. And I think the incumbent is always listed first. It's a little advantage. It really is, statistically speaking. After you get through the federal races, now you're going to go to the state races. So you'll have the State Board of Education. You'll have the Railroad Commission race. Very important race, by the way, because the Railroad Commission is misnamed. The Railroad Commission deals with gas and oil and revenues. So we need a really good person for that. I could tell you who I think it is, but and so there are two candidates there. Then the next one should be your state house. No, it'll be if your state senator is up for re-election, it'll be your state senator. And again, there'll be the Republican or the Democrat. And then the race after that is for the state house. Now, in my race, there are three of us. There happens to be a libertarian. And it's kind of irritating because they do nothing. They don't canvass. But, you know, they're going to get some votes. So as a Democrat, what I know is that lots of Republicans who just can't bear the idea of voting for a Democrat will vote for a libertarian instead. It's like, okay, that's fine. I would like for you to vote for me, but you're not going to, so better you voted for the libertarian. And then I think that's it for the state races. Then you get to the county races. Now, these are I've got to back up. Under the state races, you're going to be voting for the Supreme Court of Texas, and you're going to be voting for the highest court of appeals. Now, the Supreme Court deals with civil issues, and the Court of Appeals, the highest court of appeals, deals with criminal issues. Not all states work this way, but that's the case here in Texas. And so there are 4 people, I'm closing my eyes thinking about this, 4 races in the Supreme Court, and there are some really great candidates. I've heard them all speak. And I think it's 3 candidates in the Court of Appeals, and I've heard them speak. Oh my gosh, these people are so qualified. It is so wonderful. So there will be those races, all right? They will be under state because they serve the entire state, all right? So after you get through the state, now you come to Harris County, and you will have a ton more people to vote for because there will be all the judges. You will have the judges for the civic courts, district courts, civil district courts, for the criminal district courts. And then after you get through the courts, at the very bottom of the ballot is the constables' races. Oh, but before you get to the judges, somewhere under county, you also have precinct judges. Justices of the peace. Now this is critical because these are the people who are doing the evictions. And if you live in Justice of the Peace Precinct 5, those 2 justices right now have already started evicting people in droves. One judge has already evicted over 100 people. Most of these people were downsized because of COVID. But they're not being worked with, even though they've offered to pay, well, I'll pay a little bit and when I get a job. No, they're being evicted. Now, I don't know if you've ever been evicted, but I've had clients who were. It's humiliating and it's horrifying for the children because they end up phoning people saying, "Can I stay here?" And the kids are sleeping on the floor. And they don't know where they're going to go next. And they don't know what's going to happen with their school because that's no longer their address. They lost their school. Well, when the parents lost their job, they lost their insurance if they had it. So I think, I'm a Democrat, right? There's a reason why. I think the Democrats will do everything they can. These two in Justice of the Peace Precinct 5 races, they've already made clear they want to work with these people and not just evict them. So they don't want the landlords, the apartment owners, to be totally out of money. Okay, I get that. And it is a capitalistic society. And anyway, if nobody paid rent, then they would all go under, and then where are all these people going to live? But if you're making a good faith effort, they ought to work with you. And that's what the Justices of the Peace will attempt to do, create a good faith plan of repayment so it won't be a freebie and you have your dignity intact. Then the very last race will be for the constable's race. And as you know, in Precinct 5, which 133 is in, there was a fairly ugly issue recently, a race-based issue involving Precinct 5, which I think would never have happened with the person who's running against the current constable. So you will probably have a minimum, you'll have 75 races to vote on, possibly.
Right.
So you could look everybody up, or you could take my word for it because I met most of them, or you could just go in and say, I'm only voting for Democrats, or you can get online and study each race. But please vote every race.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a wonderful show with Ms. Sandra Moore running for Texas State House District 133. I will request you, please go vote Sandra. Nice person, as you heard. She's educated, humble, sober, sincere, and more than that, she's a grassroots resident of District 133. She practically knows what are the reasons, what are the problems, what are the causes. Please go vote her, and on top of that, do not miss the opportunity to go and vote. Please vote. Thank you very much. I'll see you in my next show. Have a good day. Hi, this is Farhan Siddiqui, and you're watching The H-Town Show.